As the chair of the opening session, I want to give you just a little bit of background for this first session that is going to feature two people from CMHC and Alex Mihailidis, who will be giving the public lecture this evening. We want to remember when we think about old people that they come in all shapes and sizes. Some are wealthy, some are not, especially unattached older people. Important facts are to remember that at any point in time, only about 7% of people aged 65 and over live in institutional settings, and that use of long-term care and other health services tends to be concentrated amongst the oldest old. So healthcare planners are particularly interested in people over 80. They are the ones most likely to make demands on the healthcare system. Where do the rest live? Well, the vast majority of people, 93%, live in private households. Some of you who were here last year will remember that I showed this slide that indicates that of those in private households, the vast majority still live in single detached houses. The next most common categories are low-rise apartments, then high-rise apartments, and then some of our newer housing forms, semi-detached houses, row houses, and apartments in duplexes. So that sets the stage, and what you want to think about is the shelter care continuum that runs all the way from market housing, that's conventional housing, houses, apartment blocks, and so on, all the way through assisted living, supported housing, up to and including long-term care, residential care, where there's 24-hour nursing. So with that for background, I would like to introduce our first speaker from CMHC.
So good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about the seniors housing market in BC. My name is Aida Niavarani, and I'm one of the market analysts at CMHC. So here's what I have on the agenda for you today. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about seniors' housing demand and focus mostly on demographics. Then I'll move on to talking about seniors' housing preferences and the factors that are influencing their choices. And at the end, I'll give you the results of the seniors' housing market survey that was done last year in 2014. They always say that you should start your presentation by telling a joke, but I don't have any jokes for you today. I can't think of anything, so I'll just move right on to starting my presentation. All right, so what are some of the factors that are influencing seniors' housing demand? Well, we all know that Canadians are living longer these days. Population is aging in general, and housing needs are evolving for the seniors. So let's start by looking at this slide where you can see the life expectancy of both men and women. As you can see, it's been increasing since 1981, and the reason for that is because seniors are now living healthier lives and they have really active lifestyles. So that is one of the factors that is supporting seniors' housing demand. The next one is the fact that population of those who are aging is increasing. So the first one is silent generation. So these are people that were born during the Great Depression. In 2014, that was 11% of the population in BC. And then we, of course, have the baby boomers, who in 2014 were 27% of the population in BC. So if you look at this graph, I have put a circle around the population of those who are actually baby boomers. And that's for 2015. But if we think about what's going to happen in 10 years, we see that that number is going to increase for that population. So baby boomers who are now between 50 to 70 years old are going to be 60 to 80 years old. And then after that, in 2035, they're going to be 70 to 90 years old. So these are the people that are going to be needing these senior houses as their residences, because the average age of a person living in those residences is 82 years old. All right, so now that we have talked about that, let's look at this lovely graph. So in 2014, there were 356,000 people who were over the age of 75 years. 53% of these people lived in the Lower Mainland, 22% Vancouver Island and the coast, 16% in Okanagan, and 9% in the rest of BC. So I have put down there that the capture rate for this population was 8.2%. So what is the capture rate? Capture rate is the percentage of these seniors that are 75 years or older who are living in seniors housing residences. So 8.2% of them were living in those units. So what influences their choice at the end of the day? Do they stay in where they are currently living, or do they choose to move out and move into a seniors housing residence? Well, I have made a chart here. This is from the census in 2011. According to the census, 88% of seniors that are were older than 75 years actually chose to live in their own residence, and 12% of them chose to move out and start living in one of those rental units that are part of seniors housing residences. So out of those 12%, 4% of them lived in residences for senior citizens. So this does not include nursing homes or homes that are for those that are in chronic pain or need long-term care. And our survey that we do is actually mainly focused on residences for senior citizens. And that brings me to talking about the senior housing survey that was done last year in 2014. So let me just show you some of the results from that survey. All right, so in our survey, we mainly focus on 3 types of units for senior citizens. There are 3 types. So the first one is independent housing. So this includes independent housing spaces, which is for people that usually don't need that much care. So the care for these people is less than 1.5 hours per day, but they have access to other amenities such as transportation, internet, exercise facilities, and such. And then we also have the non-market spaces. So these are, again, independent housing units that are subsidized by, for example, the government, and the rent for these units is usually lower. And of course, we have the heavy care units. So in heavy care units, people usually need more care. So more than 1.0 hours of care is provided to these seniors in these residences. And actually, these people usually have some kind of disability. They have problems with mobility or hearing or seeing, so they need more care in general, and they usually have conditions such as Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Okay, so now let's look at the numbers from our survey. So in BC in general, there were 29,500 units that were for seniors residences, and 56% of these units were independent living spaces, 19% were non-market, so those that were subsidized, and 25% were heavy care spaces. The vacancy rate for these units was 6.8%. So these are the units that were available for seniors to rent. And in terms of vacancy rate for independent living spaces, it was at 10.9%. And the average rent for these units was close to $2,800. So this is much higher than the rent that you usually pay. That's because of the services that they receive when they live in these kind of residences. And for heavy care, the vacancy rate was 1.5%, and the average rent was almost, actually more than twice as much as it is living in an independent living space because of the amount of care that they receive. So let me just tell you something about heavy care spaces before I move on. So in our survey, the 29,500 units that I put up there is actually not all the heavy care units that are out there. There are other residences that are 100% focused on heavy care, and those are not included in our seniors housing survey. So there were actually 21,000 other units that were specifically made for those who need heavy care. But the numbers that I'm going to talk about in the next few slides is focusing on the 25% that I have shown on this graph. So let's now talk about heavy care first. So according to Statistics Canada, those who were 75 years or older, 44% of them had some kind of disability. So this could be a mobility problem or a psychological or mental problem that they had. So 44% of seniors actually had some kind of disability problem. For people between the age of 65 to 74 years old, this percentage is slightly lower at 27%. So that's why they need to live in these heavy care units and not the independent living space units. On this graph, you can see the rent. So the BC overall rent, as I said before, was close to $6,000 for the rent. But if we compare rent across all the other regions in BC, we see that it doesn't really change much. And in Vancouver Island, it's the highest at $6,153. And if you are interested in looking at the trend of rent and how it has changed since 2009, well, in 2009, the rent was close to $4,700. So that's $1,300 less than what people are paying now. But one of the reasons behind that is because of the additional of new units to heavy care. And these new units usually have higher rents, which pushes up the average rent to what you're seeing today. So in terms of vacancy rate for heavy care, compared to 2013, in 2014, vacancy rate declined, was actually very low to begin with. So all of them were less than 3.5%, and it declined in all the regions with the exception of Okanagan, where there was a slight increase in vacancy rate. But in general, it was below 3.5%. Okay, so now that we are done talking about heavy care spaces, now let's talk about independent living spaces. So in terms of supply of independent living spaces, since 2009, there were 4,000 units that were added to the universe of independent living spaces. And how these units were divided between different bedroom types, well, most of the units were actually one-bedroom apartments. So 65% of them were one-bedroom apartments, 21% even smaller, bachelor units, and only 14% of them were two-bedroom apartments. And in terms of rent for these units, the rent was, of course, the lowest for bachelor units at $2,000. For 1 bedroom, it was close to $2,900. And for 2-bedroom units, it was $3,700 actually. So how was average rent compared between different regions in BC? Well, as you can see on this graph, it was actually the highest in the Lower Mainland at more than $3,000 to rent an independent living unit. And in terms of vacancy rate, compared to heavy care units, the vacancy rate for independent living units was higher across the region, between 6 to 12% actually, and it was the highest in Lower Mainland at 12%. However, this number had declined from 2013, so it was lower than it was in 2013 across BC. And if we want to look at the trend for independent living units, in 2009 it was close to $2,400 to rent an independent living space, and now it's about $400 more. So that's how much it has changed in terms of the rent. And if we were going to focus on the Lower Mainland and compare vacancy rate and rents between all the centers in the Lower Mainland, as you can see on this graph, I mentioned before that in Lower Mainland the average rent was $3,000, but it was the highest in North Vancouver and West Vancouver at close to $5,000 to rent a unit on average, and in the Vancouver area it was actually close to $4,000. And in terms of the vacancy rate, it was the lowest in Richmond at 1.6%, and the highest in Langley, over 15% of the units were actually vacant. And for those of you who are from outside of BC and want to know a little bit about the statistics, for Canada, the capture rate, which as I explained before is the percentage of seniors who are 75 years or older who live in residences. So the capture rate was actually the highest in Quebec City. That's partially because rent in Quebec City is actually the lowest in Canada. So the capture rate is the highest in Quebec, then the second highest in Prince Edward Island at 8.3%, and BC is the third highest at 8.2%. So in terms of majority of the 8.2% of the population who are 75 years or older live in seniors housing residences. And in terms of rent, well, the highest rent was actually in, I believe, Ontario, more than $3,000 in Ontario, and the second one was BC at $3,000 and $3,051. So it was the second highest in Canada. And in terms of the vacancy rate was actually the highest in Newfoundland at 22.6%. So there are many units available for the seniors there if they want to move up there. For Ontario, it's the second highest at 13.9%, and for BC, it's the third highest at 10.9%. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So here's the summary. Seniors are, in general, a large and growing population. Aging populations and economic and housing market conditions are fueling demand for seniors housing, and seniors housing will continue to evolve in order to respond to changing needs and preferences. So thank you. And let me know if you have questions. And that's my contact number in case you want to contact me. Yes? Yes, they are. They are on our seniors housing market report from 2014. And I should say that the new report is actually coming out at the end of June. So if you want to read that one, sure.
Yep, there is a microphone in just behind the projector. And so we would ask people that have questions to use that microphone, please. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Tang, also from CMHC.
Thank you for the introduction, Gloria, and good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here for the second year, and great to see old friends, new friends. For those of you who may not be familiar with CMHC, we are Canada's authority on housing. Please excuse me, I kind of lose my voice a little bit. Yeah, there we go. CMHC is Canada's authority on housing. We contribute to stability to the housing market and the financial system. We provide support for people in housing needs, and we offer objective research and advice to Canadian governments, consumers, and the industry. My colleague Aida has just presented on the CMHC market analysis on seniors living in assisted living facilities. CMHC research has also done extensive work in the area of housing needs for seniors and their caregivers. So throughout the years, we have developed a lot of information materials in the areas of adaptable housing. And now the challenge for us is to determine which information is most relevant and what are the most effective channels to communicate the information to the seniors or their caregivers, and what are the key factors influencing people's choices when they age. To meet these goals, CMHC hired a third-party consultant to do a qualitative market research related to adaptable housing. As part of the research, 20 focus groups were conducted across Canada, and we divided that into two phases. Phase one, we have done 20 focus groups with the younger age group. Basically, the participants were aged between 55 to 74. And in March 2015, we also did 10 focus groups across Canada with participants who were at least 75 years old at that time. And participants included a good mix of age, a good mix of gender, ethnicity, marital status, household income, health status, as well as their living arrangement, and the different physical characteristics of the houses they live in. For example, were there stairs, were there multiple levels in their house, or there was no stairs? So what did they tell us? We found that seniors or pre-seniors who participated in the study generally live independently, despite of the variety of housing types, ownership, and tenure. This is not surprising. They live either by themselves, with a spouse, or with their young adult children. I said this is not surprising because Aida has also mentioned the increasing life expectancy, the financial stability, and the health conditions allow seniors to live independently longer in their home. So when asked what were their considerations when chose their current housing arrangement, the number of factors they mentioned are pretty similar across locations and the groups, and are primarily associated with the cost, affordability, the community and accessibility to services, as well as the size and the layout of the home, which can meet the needs of the family. The study also found that participants generally do not begin to think about their future housing needs when they age until their declining health does not allow them to live in their current home. And many believe that people can live independently well into their 80s or even longer. And there's also a shared preference for maintaining independence for as long as possible. So talking about planning for their future, although they have not really thought about that, but when they were asked what factors they would consider, these factors were pretty similar to those they mentioned for their choice in their current housing arrangement. The participants recognized that they wouldn't make a housing change unless they are forced to, and their own health condition would have the biggest impact of their future housing decisions. The cost has been mentioned repeatedly to be the top of mind factor, especially in Vancouver, because the escalating housing price in Vancouver has placed a considerable pressure on seniors, and some felt that the market price right now has eliminated many options for them, because at the end of the day, these options are simply financially out of reach, because what they can consider really depend on the equity in their home. For many, quality of life also plays an important role in terms of living close to friends and relatives in all housing types, as well as when it comes to the time for them to choose seniors' residence and communities, their availability of good food, good service, recreational activities, privacy, as well as social occasions. To that end, co-op housing in Vancouver held high appeal, for it provides a sense of community, but in an independent and affordable setting. We also found that there was limited awareness and understanding of the options available for them to help seniors live in their current home longer. And there is a perception that home modifications can be costly, despite that in some jurisdictions there are financial assistance available. There's also a perception that major home modifications to make the house senior-friendly will also impact the resale value of the property. And seniors' housing was not top of mind among the participants. For many, the notion of change was uncomfortable and overwhelming, and some just choose to ignore or avoid this topic altogether. When they were asked which resources they would turn for their housing options for themselves or for their aging parents, they named quite a few sources. But the responses generally focused on the internet, and many would start their research from a Google search. In 2012, Statistics Canada reported that close to half of Canadian seniors use internet, with the usage from home the most common. British Columbia reported the greatest number of seniors using internet. However, quite a few participants expressed the concerns over the internet as a trustworthy source for older seniors. I just saw in the program that tomorrow we will have a speaker to talk about some issues to be aware of when using the internet, so which is great. During the study, there was a lot of mentioning about which format would be most preferable for seniors to get their information. While I mentioned that the online platform is pretty commonly used, many recognize that they liked the usefulness of printed material. There's also a strong desire for an interactive exchange to provide opportunities for questions and answers, and to walk through the seniors through some resources and options. These would include presentations maybe at seniors' homes or community centers. There's a need for a central source of information which is credible and also easy to access. So can CMHC be that type of source of information? As I mentioned, through decades of research, CMHC has developed a wealth of information related to seniors' housing. And the information is covered in the 4 broad information categories among CMHC, and they are accessible housing by design, flexible housing, housing for older Canadians, and age-at-home technologies. The Accessible Housing by Design series were developed for homeowners as well as professionals. It covers 11 topics, providing specifications and the detailed measurements to ensure homes are as functional as possible. Flex housing is an innovative approach to home design, construction, and renovation. The idea was that when the occupant needs in the household change, ideally the floor plan, the layout, the amenities, and the services around the home can also be adapted in a cost-effective and easy manner. Last year, we launched a brand new microsite for flex housing, and on the site, there are videos and photos taken from the demonstration unit we built in Ottawa. I'm just showing here one photo of the accessible shelves in the upper cabinet of a flex housing home, which can be fully pulled down to provide people in a wheelchair or shorter people with access to the full content in the shelf. Housing for older Canadians. This is a guide for the seniors housing market for people aged 55 or older. And this guide is meant for people who are developing housing for these people. That's including both for-profit developers and non-profit housing providers. Where to find the information? All the information products at CMHC are accessible by our website. The Housing for Older Canadians guide can be found in the business section of the CMHC website, following the building and the design link, while other publications can be found in the consumer sections on the accessible and adaptable housing landing page. And this is how the landing page looks like. As you can see, the information is organized in three subject areas, which is accessible design, aging at home, and flex housing. So that concludes my brief presentation. I will be here for the 1.5-day conference, and I have a small desktop display here. I will be happy to walk you through our website to find information which may be of your interest. So I welcome you to come to talk to me, and thank you again for your attention.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Mihailidis from Toronto, and thanks for having me here. So Gloria asked me to give a kind of quick overview of the current landscape with respect to technology to support older adults in the community. So pretty much that's what I try to do, and hence the title of my talk, 30,000-foot look at technology to support seniors in the community. It's also named that because I literally put this presentation at 30,000 feet last night, somewhere over Thunder Bay, flying over here. So I figured that was a good number to use. So we all know there's a great market potential currently right now with respect to getting to the business of developing technology to support our Canadian seniors. We've seen the statistics, we've seen some interesting numbers from our previous presentations, and we'll hear more later on. Just to kind of give you a snapshot of where things have been and where it's going. So back in 2003, and these are all US-based market numbers, it's actually quite difficult to get Canadian market numbers around here, so I'll use US at this point. The US market was estimated at $54.5 million US. In 2010, that went up to $260 million. And right now, it's estimating that the annual growth in this market will be 25% moving forward. So anyone in the audience right now, in terms of getting a company going, right now is probably the time to get into it, as you can see. Now, in terms of some of the key application areas for technology support seniors, what I've done here is I put a list together of 6 different areas. And the method in my madness in this list is I actually try to list these from the ones that are really the most commercially available right now to the ones that really are still more in the research phase and maybe still a few years out before you actually start to see them being pervasive on the marketplace. Now, this list, some of you may disagree with, some of you may agree with. This is really kind of based on our experiences over the past many years of being in this field and kind of the trends that we've been seeing. So in terms of the list, we start right at the top with mobility devices, and I'll go over each one of these in a bit of detail. Some I'll spend less time on based on how prevalent they currently are, and some I'll spend a bit more time on. We then move on to technologies for safety and security, those for cognitive stimulation, health monitoring and treatment, activity of daily living assistance or ADL assistance, and then leisure and fun. And the strange thing here really is the technologies that probably can have the most effect and impact on our wellness, those for fun and leisure, really is at the bottom of the list. You actually don't see a lot of technologies that are out there commercially really to support seniors and pretty much everyone in their daily activities that they want to do that really supports this notion of leisure. So let's start looking at each one, and this is one I'm going to spend the least amount of time on because I'm guessing we probably are the most familiar with all these different types of technologies. Now, in terms of market sales, again, this is listed from the number 1 in terms of sales and revenue to the least right now in the marketplace. And these numbers are probably about 3 or 4 years old. So in terms of the most common mobility assistive technology to support seniors, we have walkers at the top. We then have manual wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, lift and transfer devices, and environmental devices such as grab bars, handrails, toilets, bathtubs, and showers. Now you're probably wondering, well, why are the grab bars at the bottom of this list? Those are probably the ones that we see the most when we go into various environments. It comes down to market size and cost here, obviously. The ones at the top tend to be the most expensive, and so even though they're smaller markets and smaller number of sales, because they're higher prices, sometimes significantly higher obviously than the other ones, in terms of revenue and markets, that's what we're seeing right now. So as I said, I'm not going to get any more into this. I'm sure we've all seen walkers, we've all seen wheelchairs. If you have more questions about the different types, feel free to talk to me after. But I really want to jump into some of the more different types of technology that we're starting to see come out of the marketplace currently. So the next category where we're starting to see a lot of work happening and a lot of market penetration is around safety and security. I'm sure we're all familiar with various types of devices such as fall detection, patterns of living technologies. There's various companies such as Lifeline, which is now owned by Philips. Grand Care, CareLink Advantage is another Canadian-based company. We're starting to see a lot more around wandering management systems. So typically we see these maybe in long-term care facilities or other types of facilities such as that, which ensure that someone cannot leave the floor. But we're starting to see a lot of new products on the marketplace that help in the community as well. So mainly for people with dementia or Alzheimer's, that we can track them if they tend to wander off from their home. Home Free Systems is one of the companies that's out there. And then we're also starting to see a lot of medication reminding devices as well. Okay, so these range from very simple things, such as the plastic dossets that we have all probably seen and maybe used, to the more sophisticated technologies. I'll show some examples of these in a second. Now, in terms of some of the various technologies, as I mentioned, these are typically what they look like. So in terms of fall detection, your most classic one is the PERS, or the Personal Emergency Response System. This tends to be a necklace or a bracelet or some kind of device that the person is wearing. If a fall happens, they may only have to activate it, and then they're communicated through a two-way intercom system with the call center, who then assesses the situation and then calls for help. We see something like the Grand Care system. So again, these are starting to become more pervasive as well. So these are based on motion sensors or other types of sensors. Maybe they're switches on doors or refrigerators that are installed in someone's house. And based on this, we can know what the person's pattern of living may be. We know when they're going into the fridge. We know when they're going into the washroom. We know typically when they get up, when they go to sleep, etc. And what you're starting to see in terms of development work from the research perspective is these kinds of data that these very simple sensors are collecting are really being used to understand what's going on with an individual in their own home and looking for changes or deviations. So all of a sudden, if we see a person go in the bathroom twice as many times in one day, an alert may be raised to a caregiver, maybe raised to the individual themselves saying, hey, you may want to go see your family doctor and get checked out for something. And this is one of the more sophisticated medication remind devices that's on the market right now. Essentially at a set time, your little pill tray gets dispensed here, you take it, you push a button to say that I've taken it, and then repeats for all the doses that you need to take. Cognitive stimulation. This is something that in the past few years we started to see a huge boom on the market. Pretty much every single company that is out there that's in the space of technology for older adults is coming up with some kind of cognitive stimulation or cognitive gaming system. So these go by different names: cognitive stimulation, cognitive fitness, etc. And these tend to do various types of games or exercises that a senior should be following. And then there's some kind of assessment built in to let the person know how well they're doing over time. So as I said, there's many cognitive fitness technologies that are out there. Many are computer-based. We're seeing a lot more internet-based, obviously. They're multimedia platforms. So there's actually a lot of work going into the front end of these systems to make them attractive looking and make them almost look like a traditional kind of game. And as I said, they include the assessment and tracking components. And here's just kind of a very small example of the different companies and products that are currently out there right now, and a lot more coming out. Health monitoring and treatment. So kind of building on some of those motion detecting systems I described before, such as the one from GrandCare. Again, we're starting to see a new handful of technologies and products coming onto the marketplace that do that as well. So these range from environmental-based sensing ones that use motion detectors in the home to wearable devices as well. And we're all starting to see, really the onslaught of wearable devices for fitness and health. So we have Fitbits, etc. But these all have the inherent problems that people are continuing to work on, especially for the seniors market. And again, here are some example companies that are doing these products. Tunstall is probably one of the largest ones globally that's out there right now. Now, in terms of a typical health monitoring treatment system, the way it works, hopefully you can see that okay up there, is typically there's kind of two parts to it. There's the care team, which is receiving the information from the system, and then there's the actual monitoring system within the person's home. And again, as I said, this is a mix of environmental-based sensors to know, what room you may be in, how much time you're spending sleeping, on-person sensors, and then a lot of them also include physiological sensors as well. So the weight scales, blood pressure, spirometry, pulse oximetry, glucose, etc. And really the goal here is, on a daily basis or a weekly basis, depending on what the doctor tells the person sits down with his technology, takes all this information, gets uploaded to their system, and this information then is sent automatically over the internet or some kind of secure online portal to the health practitioner or to the health team to understand what's going on with the person. Now, moving more into the research-based, and I'm going to talk a bit more about these technologies in my public lecture tonight. If I don't see a good turnout, I'm guessing today's talk didn't go well this morning. So for example, we're seeing a lot of research happen on technologies to support really the basic activities of daily living. Okay, so these are not technologies that's reminding someone to go use the toilet or reminding someone to take their meds, but technologies that are really meant for those seniors who have cognitive impairment, wishing to remain in their own homes, that really need the reminders through those kind of minute steps on how to actually complete these activities. So one of the longest running projects in this area happens to be one out of Toronto with my group, is called The Coach. So this is a system that can actually track older adults through your basic self-care activities, whether it's hand washing, brushing your teeth, making a cup of tea, and then actually automatically determines what you're doing if you've made a mistake, and then gives you a reminder or prompt of what you should be doing. Okay, so if you want to know more, come tonight. And the final category, and I said the one that baffles me the most and why it's not higher on the list, is around leisure and fun. Now, there's a lot of evidence that supports that technologies or supports or services to support people having fun actually can have a dramatic effect on a person's health, even beyond the pharmacological approaches. And so this is an area that, in my mind, we really need to continue to build up upon within our particular field here. So this is one example of a technology that's currently being worked on called ePad. So this is essentially to help people engage in art. And again, it's meant more for those seniors who may have cognitive impairment, living within their own communities, or maybe going to a senior center during the day or a day program, whatever it may be. And this type of technology really promotes a person to engage in art by, again, building some of those components that I talked about in the coach system, where it gives these active prompts and tries to engage the person through various art activities in order to ensure that they can continue to do that leisure activity if that's something that they wanted to do in before. So this uses a multi-touch display here, which we're all kind of familiar with seeing with iPads and things like that, and uses artificial intelligence, or AI, essentially to learn about the person and adapts the art activity to that person's skills, their preferences, or whatever else may interest them moving forward. So I want to finish off by talking about, well, what evidence now currently exists for these different areas, and are we actually making a difference in the development and marketing of these different technologies? Now, this is one of your typical kind of tables that is always crammed down us academics' throats. I'm looking at Bill, he's smiling and laughing because he knows that's true. In terms of what levels of evidence really makes research important. Right? And at the very top of this, the most important research according to academia is those that have scientific evidence from randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, with large sample sizes, So we have a lot of people involved, and we're doing double-blind studies and all that kind of stuff that you typically hear about in the pharma industry. Now, the unfortunate thing in our field, especially around developing technologies, it's very, very difficult to do these large sorts of trials. So typically what you see in the technology and aging field is down at the bottom end of this spectrum. We tend to see a lot of very well-designed observational studies, small sample sizes. If we can get 10 people in a trial, we're ecstatic in this area, especially 10 people who remain in the entire length of the trial. And because of this, again, it's very difficult for things to make it to the marketplace. And I'll talk a bit more about this evening as well, but if I was to take a product to investors and say, well, I need $5 million from you, they kind of always get turned off by the fact that we don't have this high level of evidence, and that's something that really needs to change in our field. But what evidence does currently exist right now? Now, the good news is that there actually has been many years and a lot of different trials happening with these various types of technologies. The bad news is Canada is nowhere near the leader in this area. The majority of these trials tend to happen in the UK, Australia, and the United States as well. Now, because of this, what we're starting to see is that because there's very few studies in Canada, the marketplace in Canada really has not grown in this area, and that's because, again, the lack of evidence and the lack of really, financing that's available because of this lack of evidence. That's something we really need to move forward on. Now, when you talk about technologies for people with cognitive impairment, dementia, or other types of impairments, the evidence is even less. So, what does exist though with respect to evidence? So, one of the areas that probably the most evidence exists that actually shows that can have significant impact not only on the health of the person, but on the healthcare system, is around the whole telehealth area. So, there's various sensors, devices I showed you, the telehealth technologies with the physiological monitor, etc. So, for example, a large study happened on congestive heart failure in the UK by Tunstall. And in terms of large, I mean large in terms of the time. It went over 24 months. The sample size was still small. But essentially, they showed some significant numbers with respect to reducing hospital admissions, emergency room attendances, number of GP visits, and medication adherence just by the use of this type of technology. In Australia, they showed that using this type of technology to support congestive heart failure in seniors actually saved up over $56 million Australian dollars with respect to their healthcare system. So again, some very significant findings and very compelling findings for this type of technology to work. In terms of medication management, that MD2 system that I showed you, that white device, again, small sample size, but significant findings were found that when the automatic medication reminding system was used, we actually saw decreases, and again, significant decrease with respect to hospitalization per patient. So from 0.42 from the baseline to 0.09 when using the technology, reductions in department room visits, and just to show you that it was relatively an equal sample, they both groups in each condition both had approximately the same number of prescriptions. When it comes to the fall detection system, emergency response systems, here the evidence is actually quite mixed. And the reason I say that is because as you can see here, clinical studies have actually shown that usage of these type of technology does reduce mortality rates, does reduce hospital utilization, and can kind of really help keep the person in their home longer. However, a lot of the evidence has actually also shown that PERS actually does not reduce anxiety or fear falling. Okay? There may actually be very little evidence that supports that it does reduce the number of returns to emergency department. But one of the most staggering statistics, which is not here, is that the companies in themselves state that anywhere from 70 to 80% of their clients actually never wear the buttons. So at the end of the day, the technology is not being worn, it's not that effective. So to summarize off things, why are these systems not being used? So systems are difficult to implement and use. A lot of these new technologies are not very usable at this point. Often these systems require extra input and vigilance from caregivers, which is an important point to note. If we're designing technology and get on the marketplace for individuals who have dementia or have a family caregiver, we can't increase their burden by giving them a piece of technology. A lot of these technologies cannot handle or are not designed to handle or multi-morbidities. So if a person has a motor impairment plus a cognitive impairment, a lot of the technologies on the market right now have not been designed to deal with that. Technology transfer is very difficult in this field. I'll talk more about this evening. And really technologies are not being developed to address the specific issues of the user. And again, I'll get into this evening. So finally, where do we go from here? So more evidence is needed, obviously, to ensure that these technologies get on the marketplace. Current research events need to be supported and translated into products. We just can't be doing it for the sake of doing an academic exercise, as several of us are used to doing. We need to be able to perform real-world testing, and this goes back to Andrew's comments this morning, what AgeWell is all about. We need people like you guys in the audience that really are willing to step and say, hey, yeah, I'm willing to take this on and give it a try, to kind of collect that evidence for us. Education and awareness about what exists is critical. It's amazing. We just conducted a study with over 400 family caregivers from across Canada, and only 2% of them said they knew that technology existed to help them provide care to the senior in their life. 2% of over 400 people. Right? A better understanding of the users needed, and obviously a multidisciplinary approach is a must. Can't be the engineers, can't be the computer scientists doing what we do in our labs and kind of just pushing something out. We need to work with everyone in this room and elsewhere to ensure that we're a success in this area. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Alex, great talk. I just had a question with regard to the academic specialization of individuals conducting the studies. You were talking about computer scientists and the involvement that they have in the creation of these new products, and of course the creation of bench models versus testing in large trials. Can you say a few words about the types of individuals that need to be brought into these research and development teams? I myself, for example, am an experimental psychologist, and so knowing how to set up an RCT is not really a big issue for me. But I don't sense that a lot of the people have either the necessary training or qualifications or the like.
Sure. So right off the bat, anyone with the title experimental in their title should not be included. So. I've known Bill a long time. Yeah, that can change. So nice you're absolutely right. It's amazing. So I'm an engineer by training, but I'm actually a professor in occupational therapy. So I kind of sit in both worlds. And it's really that kind of mix that you need on a team of someone who understands the technical side, working with those who understand the person, right? And people like occupational therapists, people like gerontologists. I know, Andrew, you referred to Andrew as a human geographer, which I have no idea what that still is to this day. But those people kind of understand the social aspect of things, need to be included in this. More importantly, and what we're really starting to see missing from the teams as well, is people who understand the ethical, the social, and the cultural implication of these technologies as well. We need to include those on the teams at a much earlier phase of things as well. And finally, from day one, we need to include the user. Now, when I say the user, I'm just not referring to the senior themselves, but maybe their family members, their caregivers, whoever really is going to be part of that care practice and making that decision in terms of how the technology should be used, when it will be used, if it will be used at all, it needs to be involved. So, the unfortunate thing with this, and when we talk about this, you kind of think, well, is this really feasible? Because now I'm really saying, let's go from a research team or development team of maybe 2 or 3 people to maybe one of 10 to 15 people. So obviously a lot more resource needs to be brought in to be able to do that. And that's kind of one of the shifts we are starting to see now. You can't really apply to any granting agency on anything if you don't have these various disciplines involved. So I think there's been recognition there. Have they increased their budgets? No. But the recognition is there that you need that multidisciplinary approach.
Alex, I just wondered whether you have any thoughts on the promising uses, increased use of smartphones, smartwatch technologies, introduction of Apple's Health Kit to start improving the quality of research information.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the onset of all these new devices is really going to move and accelerate this area very, very rapidly. And it's going to do that for 2 reasons in my mind. So one, we were talking about, Bill was talking about that we're designing for our future selves, which is absolutely true with a lot of the research we're doing. And our future selves are going to come in with the full expectation that technology is going to be part of what we're doing, right? And because of that expectation moving forward, we're going to have to ensure that we can integrate things into the various platforms that people are used to. The second big thing it's going to do for this area, in my opinion, is move it from a healthcare space to a personal electronic space. One of the biggest limitations of a lot of the technologies we're talking about here, and I'm not saying this for every single technology, but the problem is that for me to get one of these devices, I need to go see an OT, I need to see a family doctor, I need to get a referral, I then need to go through all the different channels to get this technology in my hands, which increases the cost. As a developer, calling something a healthcare product increases the cost significantly. For example, we're working on fall detection systems. okay, that don't require any buttons on the person. If I'm to call it a fall detection system, I can probably produce it and market it for about $500 at the end of the day at considerable volumes. If I call it a home security product, and I don't have to go through all the regulatory issues, I can sell that for $100, right? It's doing the exact same thing. But because we're avoiding that classification, that's very important. And we're starting to see a lot of things now. You can go to the Apple store, you can buy blood pressure cuffs, you can buy various types of health devices, and the fact that these mainstream companies are getting into this area have really started to push these health devices into that mainstream where you can go to your Best Buy or wherever else and purchase them yourselves. And because of that, they're going to be more pervasive. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not saying this for everything. I wouldn't never say that you should just go buy your own powered wheelchair and start using it, right? That happened with, people laugh, that happened with scooters, at least in Ontario, where you can go to Canadian Tire now and buy a scooter. Once that happened, scooter accidents dramatically increased because they were not receiving the right training, obviously. So.
I just have a comment that is just something that's surprising. It's always surprised me. Is the numbers of, when you looked at your hierarchy of commercialization products and where cognitive enhancement games and things like that are up at the top, there's really no evidence in the literature of the effectiveness of this. So when you were talking about the evidence slide, which is, as an academic and a researcher, that's kind of what we look at, and you almost think, well, why bother? Because I'm one of these people who are involved in studies with 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 people, but it doesn't really matter because these products that don't have any evidence base and don't have the RCTs, they're selling like hotcakes. And to me, it's a comment, but it's just, I think that's the business to go into.
Yeah. And that comment is very, very important for us to note because it actually has done also a disservice to our area as well. So, for example, we've had situations, I've talked to people that have come up with a brand new technology, which is absolutely fantastic and will solve a lot of people's problems. And I say, well, why can't you get on the market? And they say, well, because I've done focus groups or market research, and everyone says, oh, well, I tried something like that 5 years ago, and it was so awful, I'll never use one again, right? Because the evidence wasn't there, no one did the due diligence, and it's really kind of still, you can have a bad first impression on a customer. That first impression stays for a very long time, and it's very hard to get around that, especially in this kind of very specialized marketplace, right?
And that's a perfect segue into what I want to talk about, is that we can't trust technology to be reliable. And I've had more frustrations with my cell phone, my computer, and by sitting at my computer, I'm not getting up and exercising. I can sit all day at that, spend 2 days totally frustrated. And I don't think technology is the way of the future. I think it's a way to make a quick buck for a handful of people. It seems like a quick, easy fix. People are people. That's what keeps us healthy. It's not sitting in front of a computer. And my smartphone, I don't think it's very smart. It doesn't work when it's nice and sunny out. I need the vitamin D, but I can't read anything on the screen of the smartphone. I'm trying to take pictures of my mom and my friends, and the darn thing's taking pictures of me. I don't have time to figure that out. So I think it's full of frustrations, full of problems.
And that goes back to the point that technology, to this point, is not being designed properly, right? And Amy, my PhD student, is right behind you, and she's doing a whole thesis around designing things properly for not only seniors, but really for any type of user. So you're right, things don't work right. In terms of your comment, you don't think technology is the way of the future? I'm going to disagree with that respectfully. I think the fact that people are people still and want to be with people. The problem, though, especially when you get into the care of people, is there's less of us to provide that care. Right? Even now, we talk to a lot of family caregivers who live hundreds of kilometers away from their aging parents, and the only way they can ensure that they're safe and to provide still that connection is through some kind of technology. I'll give you an example of a story I heard too, because I see you and that's fine. I love it when people disagree with me on these things. So. I talked to an individual who installed one of these systems in his mother's homes that ensured that she was taking her medication. And the discussion I had with him is, well, that's great, So have you seen any negative effects on her using the technology in terms of your interaction with her? Because again, that's always a big worry, that if we just kind of put these smart home systems, we're not going to communicate. And he said, absolutely not. In a way, it's actually improved things, because before I used to call my mom every day, and I say to her, the first thing I say to her is, have you taken your medication today? Now, he gets an alert on his smartphone that says she's taking her meds. He still calls her every day, but the first thing he says now, hey mom, how are you doing today? Right? So he's being able to go back to that interaction of son to mother, as opposed to caregiver to care recipient, because of the technology. But if we don't, but you're totally right. If we don't design these things properly and we don't use them in the right cases, it's not going to do anything for us. So we need to take a lot of care to ensure that we do that up front.
Good luck. I think we got a long way to go.
Oh, absolutely. So.
Hi, Amy Huang from the University of Toronto. I'm one of Alex's students, and my question's for Elizabeth, actually. Alex, you and I talk enough on email. Elizabeth, I was actually a bit quite struck by one of the findings, which I suppose is common sense in the qualitative work, that your respondents tended to avoid planning for the future with respect to, I assume, housing. And I just wondered if the panel had any ideas on how we kind of start these conversations, particularly around the development of technology when these issues are really difficult to broach. So do you have any thing to add in terms of what you found around these kind of avoidant attitudes?
Yeah. Well, I introduced that there were 2 rounds of focus groups, and we found that despite of age, we found first that with the younger age group, for people aged between 55 to 74, they basically told us they have never thought about what they would do when they age, although some of them have helped with their aging parents to get some solutions, such as moving into assisted living or sell the family home. But for themselves, they pretty much told us, I haven't thought about it. And surprisingly, when it came to the older age group, which were for people who were 75 years or older, they also said, I try not to think about it because it was unpleasant, and they just don't want to deal with, reorganize their stuff and having to deal with the moving and maybe the sales of the family home. For them, it's just too much to deal with. And many just said, I live in the moment. I tend not to think about it. I think it is linked to one of our other findings, is that there is a lack of awareness of the available programs and assistance they can get. It's not only the findings by the CMHC qualitative survey. I believe there was also a survey by the provincial government in BC, the Office of Seniors Advocate. They also found that seniors basically do not know what is existing to help them, including those home care systems which can help them stay in their current home longer. They don't know what are the options. And also I mentioned some people would think a major renovation, for example, if you install a chairlift, that might affect the resale value, because some realtors would ask the seller to remove these equipment before they put the house on the market, because they don't want to create an institutional look at home. So there is a lot of misinformation or misconception in the areas of what to do. And that's also some work we need to do at CMHC. We want to promote some ideas that universal design or agent-friendly technology is not only working for people in certain age groups, but it makes the home or place more livable for any age.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Cheryl. I have a comment and a question. I've worked in retirement homes, both the private sector and nonprofits. And currently now I have a business partner. We have a consulting firm, and we help retirement homes really improve the quality of life for seniors in the homes. But one of my comments was just around that whole idea about awareness. So my mother just turned 80, And she's thinking about, can I stay in my own home? And, you know, she can't make the meals as easily anymore. It's kind of harder for her to get around. She broke her hip a few years ago. And she's definitely scared. It's a huge fear factor, right? So I think back to when I worked with sales and marketing in the private sector in retirement homes. And what was really needed was to talk with seniors and explain, or sort of work with them about, you know, what does your home environment look like? If there are stairs, can you navigate the stairs? Well, if you move into retirement, you don't have to worry about that. Maybe do you forget about taking your meds? Well, if you move into a retirement home, there is some assistance with that. Do you need help with nutrition? You know, so there's definitely a strategy in working with seniors to help them understand the continuum, what's available, and to provide some education at the same time, right? So I think it's, you know, the time has come when we need to start to work with seniors. And I did attend Isabel McKenzie's talk a few months ago. And she talks about accessibility and affordability for housing. Mm-hmm. So my question is, is CMHC working with her office to try to promote accessibility and affordability of housing for seniors?
The quick answer is yes, because that's one of the 3 priority areas we identified. My division is now called Knowledge Transfer and Outreach. It used to be called Research and Information Transfer. And we think dealing with the aging population and accompanied with the changing housing needs should be one of the priorities. As we said, we are helping Canadians meet the housing needs. And this is one of the biggest area. It's not only at the federal government level, but also municipalities like City of Vancouver now have the accessible requirement in the new buildings for applying for building permits. And there are other like BC Housing, HPO, Homeowner Protection Office. They're working with the Safer Home Society, all to deal with the misinformation or lack of awareness to work with seniors. But I think seniors themselves are also a big player in the whole change, because another findings from the focus groups were seniors are also quite independent when it's time to make housing decisions. Some of them say, I'm the decision maker. Although some of them have made decisions for their parents, but they will say, I make the choice for myself. I don't just put the burden on my kids.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is David Rittenhouse. I'm with Integrated Tracking Technologies. Just an observation and a question to you, Alex, or the group. One of the things that I'm seeing with technologies for aging in place is looking at the Canadian market. You gave some great examples of some successful passive monitoring systems like the Tunstall that has been used successfully in Australia, UK, and there's many private sector innovation things happening in the US. One of the observations I see with Canada as a market is that we have the Canada Health Act that says, you know, this is the service box that health authorities can provide you with services, and then you have consumers or the healthcare users who are looking for new technologies, and they say, well, I'm seeing these technologies in the UK and US. Should I be paying for that, or should the health authorities or the Ministry of Health be paying for it? And that's one of those areas where you have both parties pointing fingers at each other. The other side is understanding what technology is. Is it, there was an example of using my smartphone, having challenges with that. Is it a consumer grade product, or is it a medical grade? And then the issue that there's something in between where you're having a melding of the medical grade and consumer grade products coming together for aging in place. That's my observation. Question to the board, or the panel, pardon me. What do you see Canada, or what's the direction Canada is going in with bringing together government programs, and also what the consumers or health users, and what can we do to bring that together?
Sure. So that's a great observation. You're absolutely right in terms of kind of what's happening in Canada. And, in terms of who should pay and everything else, just, my one comment on that is, it'd be great if our healthcare system does pay for these technologies, but I highly doubt we're going to see that anytime soon. So again, as an industry, I think we really need to focus on how do we move this away from the expectation of that model being there, and again, moving these as consumer products. In terms of, the direction of, the government agencies and kind of the needs of older adults in this area, my immediate answer is the government knows exactly what consumers want and are funding it, and I say that because they funded our network at a large amount of money. My real answer and truthful answer is they have no idea what seniors want, and they're not following it, they're not listening to them. They're not treating seniors as the consumer and as the customer. They're kind of treating as a different kind of health demographic that they want to do things for. And that particularly is around technology. You look at some of the things that the government is funding with respect to technology, I don't feel personally it's aligned with truly what the needs of seniors, what the seniors are telling us that they want.
And as well, informal family caregivers, what they want to do to help their aging parents. Thank you.
Deb, can you keep it real short, because you're standing between the group and coffee.
I'll keep it very short then. Deborah Sheets from the School of Nursing, and just great presentations. A really poignant, funny book if you're interested in why seniors resist talking about this is Roz Chess. Can't we talk about something more pleasant? As a caregiver for her parents, she has a lot of important things to say. My concern is that I see all these private companies developing. They're all charging for their products, and you have to have quite a bit of money if you want to stay in your home. None of them are integrated. They don't feed into electronic health records. I don't know at this point of any plug and play type technologies that I could go out and purchase for my own parents. It's very frustrating. Are we beginning to see any efforts towards integration and not just monitoring, but towards, and we want to be able to predict and we want to be able to ideally intervene?
We are starting to see efforts towards integration. The unfortunate thing, that effort is really being led by these big players such as the Apples and the Googles of the world, which are so big that they don't need anyone else really to be part of that marketplace. Right? So the answer is yes, but yes with some potential consequences.
Please join me in thanking our panel for a very interesting session.